Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 118 of Fracking Nightmare. Now, tonight's episode is going to be, I think, relatively short, primarily because I am now back on track with the morning live streams, and I've done 118 episodes of Fracking Nightmare in a little under 5 years. But apparently I'm advised by somebody who clearly has way too much time on their hands that I've done 167 8:30 a.m. live streams in exactly 1 year. And the live streams go out, funnily enough, at 8:30 every morning during the week. And it's 15-20 minutes update on what's occurring, primarily in the world of fracking, but increasingly looking at the imminent threat of 5G. And in fact, we are very much looking to change the title of Fracking Nightmare to something that also incorporates 5G, because I think there's a very good possibility that fracking will be off the British government's agenda in the not too distant future. But the community that has evolved over the past 5-6 years to challenge the unconventional hydrocarbon fracking agenda needs to grow exponentially to address the issues associated with 5G and the pernicious threats and the hazard of these microwave electromagnetic frequencies. And whereas fracking potentially impacts upon about 30% of England, primarily across the north, 5G, if it's rolled out on schedule, which is back end of 2020, it will impact the entire country. So just as 5 years ago, when I started the Fractured Future tour, or nearly 6 years ago now, 63 dates around the country, just sowing the seeds and encouraging people to do their own research into the hazards associated, in some cases life-threatening, with fracking. Now I ask people to do exactly the same with 5G. And one man who's right on point is Mark Steele in Gateshead. And in fact, he has 2 court cases coming up, one on October the 11th and the second one on October 23rd. The first one will be at Newcastle Crown Court, where he will be challenging the injunction that Gateshead Metropolitan Borough Council have placed on him from discussing 5G. In fact, the injunction specifically prevents him from causing distress to the residents of Gateshead by talking about the dangers of the 5G microwave frequencies. So obviously, every single council in the country is potentially affected here if they haven't done the research on 5G and the health hazards associated with LED street lighting. So yes, I know it sounds like it's something straight out of rampant conspiracy. And that's, of course, exactly what the establishment and the corporations want you to think, which is why it is absolutely crucial that people do their own research. Now, I know that some people will say, aren't you getting a bit previous here, Ian, by suggesting that fracking may be history by this time next year? Well, let's just take a look at what's occurring. First of all, the only risk of a frack this side of 2020 in the UK is at Preston New Road. And that's not exactly a done deal yet either. And especially if the community there can put their differences aside and get some focus, then there's a very real possibility that it could grind to a halt sooner rather than later. Elsewhere in the country, obviously over the eastern side, the Pennines, there's 2 iGas sites at Misson Springs and Tinker Lane, and 3 potential INEOS sites across South Yorkshire and North Derbyshire. But none of those are going to be anywhere near a frack this side of 2020. So all to play for. But let's take a look at what's been going on, because it's been a very, very interesting week in the world of anti-fracking. And frankly, the mother frackers have not come out of it too well. Well, let's take a look at this. This is an event that occurred a couple of days ago at the B&Q camp just off of Preston New Road. Now, this is on a piece of land that is actually owned by Wren Kitchens, and the camp has been here since January of 2017. And in fact, my understanding is that there is an informal agreement between the residents of this camp and the landowner that if the landowner gave them an appropriate opportunity of notice, then the camp would move. Because, frankly, there's quite a number of other locations that they could move to. But, you know, they're tucked away there. They're not causing anyone any inconvenience. But a couple of days ago, a bunch of bailiffs, or so they claimed, rocked up and said they were there to implement a High Court eviction order. Well, as you can see in the picture here, these bailiffs, I'll use that term loosely, are not wearing any identification. And if they are private security, they are supposed to wear their SIA identity on their arms or on their belt, where it has to be visible. And if they are High Court enforcement officers, then once again they have to prove that through very visible ID. Well, it was a bit of a standoff, really, because initially the bailiffs were claiming that they had an enforceable High Court document which was duly stamped and signed, and the police initially claiming that they were there to simply ensure there was no breach of the peace. But that really wasn't the case, because if you look at the videos that are available from this event, it's very clear that initially the police were determined to help enforce the eviction. But eventually common sense prevailed, and the police and the bailiffs were challenged over the veracity of these documents. Now, I think this is very, very interesting, because what we are seeing here, I believe, is a prima facie example of the corporations effectively believing that they are above the law. And as we'll discuss a little later, it is very, very clear that the country is in the grip of a corporatocracy. A corporatocracy where parliamentary law is effectively relegated into very much second place, and corporate law, i.e. commerce, has absolute precedent over parliamentary law, and certainly precedence over human health and well-being. So let's take a look at this document, because this is the document that was presented as the properly stamped and signed High Court order. But let's take a closer look at it, because first of all, the stamp would seem to be underneath the text. So it actually looks as though the stamp was applied to a blank sheet of paper, and then the text was applied over the top, which would, of course, immediately lead to one to question the veracity of the document and whether there is an attempt at fraud here. Well, let's take a closer look at the content of this document. I'll break it down. This is the top part of that document. And you see here the stamp there up in the top left. And then we see that the claimant here is FKE. Limited, which is apparently a company based in York, and 3 of the directors of FKE are also directors of Wren Kitchens, which would appear to hold the land registry. But like I said, why would they do this unless, or if there was an agreement in place, albeit informal, that the residents of the camp would move if asked to do so and given appropriate notice. And my understanding is they haven't been asked to move, and certainly they haven't been asked to or given any notice to move, and these bailiffs just rocked up unannounced. And you see here, it says that the order is issued to Simon John Williamson, an enforcement officer authorised to enforce writs of possession and control issued from the High Court. Well, as we go down here, we see that the claimant is FK Limited to have possession of it, yet it's not dated. There is no date here. The writ was issued by the Manchester District Registry of the High Court on blank. And the witness here, the Right Honourable David Gauke, Lord High Chancellor of Great Britain. So it's looking very much like the Right Honourable David Gauke has had his name taken in vain and applied to a fraudulent document. And then we look at the final third of this page and we see that the date of the judgment or order is the 24th of the 2nd, 2017. And then it looks like what's been added here is the 54th of July, 2018. Now, unfortunately, of course, this would indicate that this was produced by somebody with a room temperature IQ who clearly has, it's escaped him that I think July is limited to 31 days and not 54. And then there's no costs. And I don't know of any eviction order that's applied to for in the courts to be granted without some element of cost. So the veracity of this document is very much called into question. And then a stamp on one of the other documents, High Court of Justice, the Business and Property Courts in, it looks like probably Manchester, on the 14th of May. And an indeterminable date there because it's been scratched out, but not sure what reference the 14th of May has when the previous document clearly said the 24th of February and the 54th of July. And then there was this document, High Court Solutions, that was posted. This land has been entered and repossessed on the instructions of a High Court writ of possession dated the 16th of August. So we got yet another date thrown in to the melt here. That's at least 4 dates. Any attempt to re-enter the land is a criminal offence and the police will be called. Any other inquiries may be referred to the landowner managing this case on FKE Limited, telephone number 0798 069 3272. Well, having some concerns about the veracity of this document, I decided that probably best to actually make a call. So I called that number, and as you can see, I had it logged in my phone as B&Q landowner ? And there was no answer. It was just going to voicemail. So I didn't really want to leave a voicemail. So I texted, and here was my initial text. I'm trying to contact you regarding High Court Solutions attempt to recover land on your behalf. I would appreciate a call to discuss the matter further. Thanks and regards, Ian. And the response was quite prompt. It said, what is the nature of your inquiry? I said, would you please confirm that you are the registered landowner of the site adjacent to B&Q off Preston New Road? And would you please advise which court and which judge issued the injunction document presented by the unidentified bailiffs who attempted to evict the people camped at this location? And here is an interesting response. I am not the owner. Thank you. Well, couldn't leave it at that. So I sent this text. Your phone number is on the document presented by the unidentified bailiffs as being the contact number for the landowner and for any inquiries relating to the court documents. Are you the person responsible for seeking the court order? If so, which court and which judge granted the order? Well, that got a very, very interesting response. Please do not contact me again. Thanks. Well, I just sent one more text, and that was, are you claiming that you have no connection with this court order and that your number was placed on the documentation without your consent or knowledge? Falsifying a high court order is an extremely serious offence. So I'm trying to ascertain the facts before making a public statement. Well, call it a hunch, but this looks very much to me like Quadrilla using third parties to effect an illegal eviction. Now, why would they do that? Well, quite possibly they are looking to bring in the frack spread sometime soon. Now, they have an injunction in place which prevents any direct action between Peel Hill, just to the north of the roundabout by B&Q, the length of Preston New Road to 50 yards south of the entrance. So that is the injuncted area. Anywhere prior to Peel Hill is not incorporated in the injunction. And Quadrilla, for whatever reason, are probably concerned that those people on the B&Q camp might be smart enough to realise that there's not 54 days in July, but they also might be smart enough to be creative in terms of any action against the frack spread, because Quadrilla need the frack pumps to be able to carry out the frack at Preston New Road. And as I've said, this will be the only location in the UK to be at risk of a frack this side of 2020. So there's little doubt here that somebody has perpetrated a fraud. And will the police investigate? Well, the police were quick enough to come down to the camp at the B&Q site and attempt to support the unidentified bailiffs in the eviction. And eventually, the inspector actually acknowledged that the document might not be genuine. Well, so what are you going to do about it, Inspector? You know, probably you are tempted to turn a blind eye. But my counsel to anyone in the B&Q camp and associated with the anti-fracking campaign in Lancashire is to report this. Take the JPEGs from this video. I'll put the JPEGs on the Facebook page. Take the JPEGs, take them to the police, report this to the police, impersonating High Court enforcement officers and presenting a fraudulent High Court document should lead to criminal action. So, desperation in Lancashire. And, you know, the game isn't over by any stretch of the imagination, because a few weeks ago, obviously, Greg Clark announced that Quadrilla had effectively met all of the criteria and that he was giving them the go-ahead to frack. But that still hasn't been initiated. And, of course, there was a potential something in the ointment, fly in the ointment, on the basis that no sooner had the permission to frack been granted, and United Utilities, the water company supplying the northwest of England, announced that they were going to implement a hosepipe ban from, I believe it was the 5th of August. And then miraculously, despite there being minimal rainfall, United Utilities announced that actually, no, there's not going to be a hosepipe ban at all. And this was purely a political move, as can be seen by these pictures taken this past weekend of the reservoirs in the northwest of England. Now, the northwest is absolutely reliant on reservoirs. There's an area up around Cumbria which gets its water from other sources, primarily from, well, it used to be Ennerdale, but now it's boreholes. But that's another story, a whole other issue to be discussed there at some future date. But look at these reservoirs. This is the Derwent Reservoir. This is the old railway line. And of course, it won't be long before the village of Derwent is probably visible again. I cannot recall in all my travels around the north of England over recent years the reservoirs being this low. But don't worry, because United Utilities have said there's no need for a hosepipe ban. Now, I wonder who brought the pressure to bear. No doubt a Freedom of Information request to United Utilities might ascertain whether or not there's been any government pressure. In fact, of course, United Utilities as a private company are not necessarily bound to respond to an FOI request, except that once upon a time these were, of course, nationalised utilities, and so the Information Commissioner may still decree that as a former nationalised industry, they are required to respond to questions. But if they don't, then let's ask the question of the various other government departments and establish whether there's been any correspondence with United Utilities, particularly over the hosepipe ban. Well, don't expect an answer necessary anytime soon. But this is an area where the people of the northwest of England absolutely need to focus on with their elected representatives. You know, they've been off on their annual vacation. They've just returned to Parliament for a few days so that Theresa May can feed the country a whole bunch of BS over the Novichok affair. And now they're going into the conference season where Theresa May will be desperate not to demonstrate any more dance moves and, of course, attempt to hang on by the skin of her teeth to her precarious residence of number 10. So there's an opportunity here for people to really get on the case. Every MP in the northwest of England needs to be targeted and asked why the hosepipe ban was lifted when the reservoirs are in such a depleted state. And I'm sure that United Utilities are doing a rain dance every evening in an attempt to replenish the stocks before people find that the pressure in their water supply has diminished to barely a dribble. So, not over by a long stretch. Elsewhere, a tremendous success for Leith Hill. And this beautiful part of the country, of course, this is my home territory, born and raised, and my family home still just a few miles to the north of Leith Hill. And after a 10-year battle, the residents of Leith Hill and Dorking can heave a massive sigh of relief as Michael Gove, the Environment Minister, instructed the Forestry Commission not to renew the lease to Europa Oil and Gas, and thereby effectively preventing them from pursuing their quest to extract unconventional hydrocarbons from this beautiful, beautiful ancient forest. This picture you see on the screen here is Cold Harbour Lane, the single track road that runs up from Dorking up to Cold Harbour and down the other side of Leith Hill, one way to Abinger, and in the other direction down to Capel, I believe it is. Well, DEFRA, the Department for the Environment and Rural Affairs, issued this statement. They said the nation's woods and forests are cherished natural assets, and we want to ensure that they are protected now and into the future. Any decisions on activity within the public forest estate are made on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the environmental impacts and the latest evidence. Because of the potential impact on nearby ancient woodland, the Environment Secretary has decided not to extend Europa Oil and Gas lease to carry out activity in Forestry Commission land. Well, hopefully the same common sense prevails over the desire by INEOS to seismic test within Sherwood Forest, because, as I've said many times, you don't conduct seismic testing unless you intend to drill, and you don't drill unless you intend to frack. Now, a few months ago, Michael Gove, the Environment Secretary, gave a very, very interesting speech in I believe he was actually in Dorking at the time. Now, he is the MP for Surrey Heath. So his constituency, whilst not incorporating Leith Hill, I believe does abut right up to that constituency. So obviously he's very conscious of the potential impact on votes within his constituency. But this is his statement, or an extract of his statement from 2018. He said, "My belief is that the future for the rural economy, the future for food production, the future for tourism, and the future for all those who cherish and live in or near rural areas, that future will depend on people recognizing that we are playing an important role as stewards of, protectors of, enhancers of our natural environment, and that the food that we produce and the countryside we look after and the biodiversity which we cherish is all underpinned by a commitment to the highest possible standards and the highest possible ambitions for the future." So how does one square that statement with the statement issued just 6 days later by these two gentlemen, Greg Clark and James Brockenshire? Greg Clark on the left there, he's the Minister of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And on the right, we have James Brockenshire, who is the Communities Minister, having taken over from Saeed Javid after he was appointed to the role of Home Office following Amber Rudd's disgrace. Well, these two are extremely ambitious, particularly the man, I nearly said boy, the man on the left. He is a Teesside boy, but very smart, educated at Cambridge before he got lured into the corporate world and then into politics. Now, word from inside Westminster is that Greg Clark is very, very smart kiddie, but he's also extremely ambitious, quietly ambitious. And both of these guys are about the same age, I think in their very early 50s. And it's reported that Greg Clark has certainly ambitions to achieve high office within the Tory party, up to and potentially including residence in number 10. But of course, with the current incumbent, he wouldn't have necessarily anything to beat, but he's not yet playing in the first division, as it were. So he's got a way to go. And I am sure that Greg is smart enough to realise that if fracking actually goes ahead and does cause the problems that it has caused elsewhere in the world, which, call it a hunch, it will, then his political career could be seriously mired. And of course, he was hoping to be moved out of this role in the reshuffle earlier in the year. But because Jeremy Hunt at the time refused to move, Greg Clark was left holding the fracking baby, as it were. So I think that there is ulterior motive in these two guys making a joint ministerial statement promoting the idea that fracking should become permitted development, i.e., basically no planning process to go through whatsoever. And as somebody observed to me earlier today, what on earth makes a nascent, novel industry that is basically currently being driven by small bit part players that are struggling to actually retain any kind of financial resilience, INEOS perhaps being the exception. What on earth gives this industry the influence to be able to override literally hundreds of years of planning procedure? And that these two guys can make the proposition that this industry, which has no track record whatsoever in the UK, except one of disaster, i.e. the seismic events of 2011, created by Quadrilla at Priest Hall, and although yet unattributed, the 10 seismic events in Surrey since the 1st of April. And what has changed in the 1st of April since the 1st of April and over the past 50 years? Well, the presence of UCOG and Europa, for one. So although, of course, they are denying any responsibility, it is certainly not going unnoticed that there's more than a passing likelihood that they can be traced back to hydrocarbon abstraction or re-injection, perhaps. So this industry does not have any saving grace whatsoever. So what on earth has made these guys propose permitted development? Well, I think there is ulterior motive here. I think they're trying to stick literally some dynamite up the proverbial rear orifices of councillors, particularly Tory councillors right across the country, and say, look, you guys need to get involved. You guys need to start taking an interest in what's occurring here. And there's little doubt that the vast majority of councillors who have entered into public office for the genuine reasons will be mortified that something like fracking is potentially taken out of their remit and is simply dealt with either at central government or, in this case, no government at all. They're just given free rein. Once they've established access to land, then they can just rock up and establish a well site. And if they don't get the access to the land, then they just go to court, the civil courts, and effectively are able to access the land through compulsory purchase. So, people really need to wake up and take a look at what's occurring here. We have major issues right now that are challenging and threatening the facade of democracy in this country. So there is a little under 7 weeks left on the consultation period of permitted development. So I know that Frack Free Rydale are putting up some guidance notes to help people interpret the questions. I think there's only 7 questions off the top of my head in this survey. Now, the questions are not great questions, and there's no doubt whatsoever that SurveyMonkey, who have been employed to conduct this survey, may well have produced the survey on the basis that the results can be interpreted exactly however the government wants them. So let's not make it easy for them. First of all, there needs to be a massive response. And secondly, the opportunity has to be taken to articulate not only the objections to permitted development, but the objections to the whole unconventional hydrocarbon exploitation process, period. 30%, primarily the north of England, being targeted for the abstraction of unconventional hydrocarbons, an industry that has left a trail of devastation in its wake wherever it has become established around the country. So that's really what I wanted to cover tonight. We are on the cusp, I think, of a massive breakthrough here. It may not be obvious to people. And I know, obviously, right now in Nottinghamshire, there's much debate over the iGas injunction. And, that will definitely be challenged in the courts on the 2nd of October. And by the way, tomorrow, I as a potential litigant in person, not absolutely confirmed yet. But certainly we're going to make sure that iGas do not get a free run here. But the first thing that I will be doing is writing to the court and inviting Lord Justice Morgan to recuse himself from the case, because he is the judge who ruled on the INEOS hearing. So iGas rock up at court on Friday, submit the application for injunction, and it's stamped on the Monday. So an injunction is put in place pending a full hearing on the 2nd of October by the same judge that has effectively rubber stamped the INEOS injunction. Now, we know that the INEOS injunction is being challenged. The Joe Boyd and Joe Corrie have obtained permission by the Court of Appeal to challenge that ruling. But how on earth can there be even the perception of justice being seen to be done, or a fair hearing being achieved, when it's the same judge that made the decision for INEOS a year or so ago? So, Lord Justice Morgan, I'm sure your integrity is absolute. But in the interests of justice being at least seen to be done, then my recommendation is that you seriously consider whether it's appropriate for you to hear the case. Now, I know you're not watching this tonight, so that's a rhetorical statement, but I will be submitting a letter to the court to articulate my concerns over you presiding over this case. And, of course, if you decide to throw it out, well, so be it. We'll see what transpires in the courts on the 2nd of October. Anyway, that's it from me this evening. I am broadcasting every morning, every weekday morning at 8:30 a.m. And please, now is the time more than ever to participate, to get involved. If to do no more than respond to the permitted development questionnaire, and we'll put the links under the video both on Facebook and on YouTube. But please go to that questionnaire, and also we'll put the link to the Frack-Free Rydale guidance notes on response to this survey. But I don't think that I'm too far out of kilter here. I think that we are looking at the final months of the unconventional gas industry. The only person that's going to probably shed a tear over that is Jim Ratcliffe and a few mug punters that have been suckered into investing money into an industry that really has no future whatsoever. So soon, the fracking nightmare in the UK may be well and truly nailed. Unfortunately, of course, we then have to deal with 5G. And if you haven't looked at 5G, if you think it's just the next generation of telephone network from 4G, then I urge you to do your own research. Thanks for joining me this evening, and hopefully I'll catch with you tomorrow morning at 8:30. You have a good evening.